Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're looking at the Indonesian economy in Q3 2024 and kind of looking ahead a bit too, the whole economic outlook thing. And we've got a ton of material to go through.
Yeah, a really interesting mix,
Outside.
too. We've got everything from the nitty-gritty of budget documents to some seriously in-depth industry surveys.
And you know what? I've got to say, I've already spotted some pretty surprising things in here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like how some industries are absolutely crushing it even with the whole global slowdown thing happening. And then you've got the political stuff.
Ah, yeah, the election.
Exactly.
Yeah,
How that might shake things up for investors in different sectors. It's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
absolutely. What I find particularly interesting is this theme of resilience that keeps popping up. It's almost like Indonesia's got this shield protecting its economy from all the global craziness.
Yeah, well, let's start with the basics then. What's the overall picture of how Indonesia's economy performed in Q3?
Well, the latest report from the Ministry of Finance is showing that Indonesia's GDP is up by 4.94% year on year.
So almost 5%. It's not bad at all, right?
Not bad at all, especially when you consider the global economic slowdown happening all around.
It's like they're in their own little bubble.
It really does seem that way. They're holding steady while others are kind of struggling. It's a pretty good sign for their economy.
Yeah, totally. And something else I noticed is that Indonesia recently got bumped up to an upper middle income country.
Oh, right. That's a pretty big deal. That reclassification from the World Bank is basically saying, hey, Indonesia, you're doing great.
It's not just about hitting certain numbers, it's about how the world sees them now. It opens up all sorts of doors for trade and investment.
Absolutely. But let's dig a little deeper into what's actually fueling this growth. The reports point to domestic demand as a major factor.
Makes sense. People are spending money, which means they feel good about the economy.
Right. And that's reflected in the household consumption figures. They're showing a solid 5.06% growth year on year. You've got increased mobility, people are moving around more, plus stable purchasing power and consumer confidence consistently high.
So people are confident enough to spend and keep the economy moving. Are there any specific industries that are really standing out in all of this?
A couple really jump out. First up, transportation and storage. They're seeing a massive 14.74% growth year on year.
Wow, 14.74%. What's driving that?
It's actually pretty logical when you think about it. People are heading back to the office after the pandemic. Tourism is picking up again. So naturally, the need for transportation and logistics is skyrocketing.
Like more people on the move, more stuff to move around. And speaking of tourism, it sounds like that sector's having a bit of a party too.
Oh, absolutely. The reports are highlighting a 10.9% year-on-year growth in tourism and accommodation.
So both domestic and international travel are helping to boost those numbers.
Exactly. It seems like people are eager to get out and explore again, which is great news for Indonesia.
It's a good sign for their economy, for sure, but it can't all be good news, right? There's got to be some challenges too.
Of course, every economy has its ups and downs.
So what are some of the things that might be holding Indonesia back?
One of the big ones is the shrinking exports and imports.
What could causing that?
Well, it seems like it's mostly due to those falling commodity prices we've been hearing about. And then there's the whole slowing economic activity in some of Indonesia's main trading partners.
Right, so the global slowdown is definitely having some kind of ripple effect on them. Anything else they should be keeping an eye on?
Well, there's this whole El Nino thing looming. The reports are warning about the potential impact of reduced rainfall on agriculture.
Yeah, that's a big deal, especially for a country with such a huge agricultural sector.
Yeah.
So how is the government dealing with all of this? What kind of policies and initiatives are they focusing on?
Well, they're juggling a lot of things right now. Controlling inflation's a big one. Then there's the whole balancing act of managing the state budget effectively while still attracting investment. And of course, making sure social safety nets are strong. It's a lot to handle.
So let's break it down one by one. Starting with inflation, what's the latest there?
As of November 2023, the overall inflation rate was 2.86% year on year.
So almost 3%. Is that good or bad?
Well, it's definitely up from the 2.28% they saw in Q3, which suggests that those inflationary pressures might be starting to build.
I see. So keeping a lid on that is going to be crucial for them going forward. What about the state budget then? Any interesting insights from the 2024 draft?
The 2024 budget draft really highlights their priorities. They're laser focused on controlling inflation, of course, alleviating poverty, reducing stunting, and then attracting investment. The total budget is looking like it'll be around 2.78 trillion rupiah.
Okay, and how are they planning on spending all that money?
They're putting a lot of emphasis on key areas like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. And they're also planning to up the spending on social assistance programs.
So it's all about finding that balance between boosting economic growth and making sure that people are taken care of.
Hmm.
Now, what about attracting investment? What's their strategy there?
One of their big plays is attracting foreign investment, especially in high growth sectors like electric vehicles. They're showcasing all the advantages Indonesia has to offer strategic, abundant natural resources and a rapidly growing consumer market.
So they're saying, hey, come invest in Indonesia. It's a great place to do business. And is it working?
It seems to be. They actually had a pretty impressive investment realization number in Q3 2023 alone. We're
Really?
talking 374.4 trillion rupiah.
So they're well on their way to hitting their targets for the year.
Yeah.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about a company that caught my attention in all of this research, Telkom Indonesia.
Ah, yeah, Telkom. They're really making a name for themselves.
Yeah, they seem to be. As a leading telecommunications company, what's their game plan in this whole global market?
They're all about innovation and strategic partnerships. They're pouring money into digital infrastructure, things like cloud solutions and cybersecurity. It's all about boosting their offerings and expanding their reach to a global audience.
So they're not content with just being a big fish in a small pond. They want to swim with the sharks. But what kind of challenges are they running into trying to do all this?
Well, navigating the global telecommunications landscape is no walk in the park.
What do you mean?
Every country has its own set of rules and regulations. Then you've got sanctions from international bodies. It's a lot to keep track of, especially with technology changing so rapidly.
So staying compliant is a full-time job in itself. Now, we've talked a lot about the economic side of things. But what about the political scene in Indonesia? There's an election coming up in February 2024. How could that shake things up for the economy?
Yeah, the election is a big wild card. We've got three main contenders, each with their own vision for the country's economic future. And depending on who wins, it could really shift things for businesses and investors.
It sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty hanging in the air. Can you give us a quick rundown of what each candidate is promising on the economic front?
Absolutely. One candidate pair is really hitting home on those bread and butter issues. They're talking about lowering the cost of living, especially for basic necessities like food and energy. They're also really pushing job creation and poverty alleviation.
So they're trying to appeal to voters who are struggling to make ends meet. What about the second pair?
They're all about national independence and self-sufficiency. They want Indonesia to be less reliant on other countries. They're talking about boosting domestic production of things like food, energy, and water. They're also really keen on developing the creative green and blue economies. Basically, they want to create jobs and revitalize those natural resources.
So it's a more inward-looking approach. And the third candidate pair?
They're putting the spotlight on human development, research and innovation, and sustainable economic growth. They want to improve healthcare, revamp education, and invest heavily in research and innovation in those key industries. And like the second pair, they're also big on the whole green and blue economy thing.
So we've got three very different visions for Indonesia's economic future. It's going to be really interesting to see how the voters decide.
Absolutely. The election could be a real turning point for Indonesia.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive already. We've covered a lot of ground, from Indonesia's impressive GDP growth and the success of certain industries to the challenges they're facing on the global stage and this big election just around the corner.
It's a dynamic picture, that's for sure. But I think we've laid a good foundation for understanding the forces at play here.
Absolutely. And speaking of deep dives, in the next part, we're going to take a closer look at a topic that's becoming more and more crucial for Indonesia: non-proliferation.
That's right. We're going to explore how Indonesia's economic ambitions, especially their focus on high-tech sectors, are bumping up against global efforts to stop the spread of dangerous technologies.
It's a complex and fascinating issue with some pretty far-reaching implications.
It really is. Stay tuned. Oh, before we jump into non-proliferation, I just thought of something else about the election.
Okay, what's that?
Well, all that campaign spending is probably going to boost consumption.
Right. People are out there buying banners and T-shirts and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly. And that could give certain sectors a bit of a temporary lift. But there's always another side to the coin.
What do you mean?
All that uncertainty surrounding the election results, that can make investors a little jittery.
Makes sense. Nobody wants to put their money into something that might go south depending on who wins.
Exactly. So it's like this weird mix of short-term gains and potential long-term volatility.
Classic election year stuff.
Okay.
But let's get back to what you mentioned before the break, this whole non-proliferation thing. Why is it such a big deal for Indonesia right now?
It's all about the way economics and security are so intertwined these days, especially as Indonesia is trying to attract all this high-tech investment, particularly in areas like electric vehicles.
EVs. What do they have to do with security?
Well, think about it. Some of the technologies used in EVs, those batteries and all that, they can also be used for other things.
Like what?
Weapons manufacturing, for example.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that. So Indonesia has to be careful that they're not accidentally helping to spread dangerous technologies while trying to boost their economy.
Exactly. It's about being smart and responsible with their development.
So how do they walk that tightrope?
One way is to really tighten up those export controls. They need to know exactly what's coming in and going out and who's involved.
So it's all about keeping tabs on those sensitive materials and technologies.
Precisely. And they also need to be really careful about who they're letting invest in their country.
That makes sense. They need to make sure those companies are playing by the rules.
Right. No shady dealings. Everyone needs to be following international non-proliferation standards.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is. You want the investment, but you also don't want to compromise your security. And this is where working with other countries becomes really important.
Right. Strength in numbers.
Exactly. Indonesia needs to team up with the global community, share information, learn from each other.
Makes sense. So it's a shared responsibility.
Oh.
Okay, but let's shift gears for a second and look at some recent data from Bank Indonesia. They do this business tendency survey.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it gives you a feel for how businesses in Indonesia are feeling about the economy. Like, what are their expectations? What challenges are they facing?
Exactly. It's like a snapshot of business confidence right from the source.
So what's the overall mood? Are businesses feeling optimistic?
It's kind of a mixed bag. It's like this cautious optimism.
Cautious optimism.
Yeah, they see the global slowdown. They know the election is coming up, but they're also seeing opportunities. It's like they're saying, yeah, things are tough, but we're Indonesian businesses. We're resourceful. We'll find a way.
I like that attitude. Are there any particular sectors that are feeling extra optimistic?
The mining and quarrying sector is doing pretty well.
Why is that?
Well, the global demand for minerals is high, especially things like nickel.
Right, nickel, that's a key component in those EV batteries.
Exactly. And Indonesia has a lot of it, so they're in a good position to capitalize on that demand.
It's like their bet on EVs is starting to pay off.
It seems like it. Oh, and the construction sector is also doing well. Lots of infrastructure projects going on.
That's good news. Infrastructure is key for economic growth.
Exactly. And then you've got the information and communication sector. They're seeing a lot of growth, too.
Which makes sense. The digital economy is booming in Indonesia.
It really is. But of course, there are also some concerns. Inflation is one that keeps popping up.
Yeah, that's not surprising. It's a global issue right now.
Right. Businesses are dealing with rising costs, and they're having to raise prices, which can be tricky.
Absolutely. It's a tough balancing act. Any other challenges they mentioned?
Actually, despite the challenges, there were also some positive trends in the survey. Like labor utilization is improving.
Meaning?
Businesses are hiring more people, which is a good sign for the job market and the economy as a whole.
That's encouraging. Anything else?
Yeah, access to bank loans is getting easier, so businesses can get the financing they need to grow and expand.
That's a good sign of a healthy financial system.
Yeah.
So overall, it sounds like Indonesian businesses are facing a mix of challenges and opportunities.
Exactly. It's a dynamic situation. But the key takeaway is that they're adapting. They're resilient.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay, but before we move on, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier about those potential consequences if Indonesia doesn't handle this whole dual-use technology thing carefully.
Oh, right. Well, if they don't take it seriously, it could really hurt their reputation on the global stage.
What do you mean?
Other countries might not trust them. They could face sanctions or have trouble accessing certain markets, and investors might get spooked.
So it's not just about security, it's also about economic stability.
Exactly, and it shows how complicated things are these days. You can't just focus on one thing. Everything is connected.
Absolutely. Well, this part of our deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've talked about non-proliferation, delved into the minds of Indonesian businesses, and explored how economic and security issues are all tangled up.
It's been a good discussion.
It has. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to look at. How does Indonesia's approach to non-proliferation affect global efforts to tackle this problem? We'll explore that after a short break.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been talking about how crucial non-proliferation is for Indonesia. But how does their approach to this whole thing stack up against their neighbors, other countries in the region?
Indonesia's always been a bit cautious when it comes to joining those big international initiatives, like that Proliferation Security Initiative.
Why is that? They've always been really big on maintaining their sovereignty. They don't want to get caught up in anything that could be seen as like political meddling.
So they're playing it a bit more independently.
Exactly. They prefer to work within the UN framework and push for solutions that involve everyone.
Makes sense. But does that make it harder for them to actually deal with these proliferation risks, especially as they're becoming more and more integrated into global supply chains?
It's a tough one. Some experts think Indonesia could benefit from being a bit more proactive,
Mm-hmm.
really beefing up their trade control systems and working more closely with other countries to share information and strategies on nonproliferation.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between staying independent and collaborating effectively with the rest of the world.
Exactly. And it's a discussion that's happening right now within Indonesia's policy circles. Some folks are pushing for a more active role in those international nonproliferation groups, while others are saying, hold on, we need to protect our sovereignty and make our own decisions.
It's a complex issue for sure, but at the end of the day, the choices Indonesia makes will have a big impact, not just on their own security, but on the whole region and the effectiveness of global nonproliferation efforts.
It really highlights how intertwined economics and security are these days. Everything's connected. What Indonesia does with their economy can shape the global landscape.
It's a big responsibility. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways about the Indonesian economy? What's the big picture story here?
I think the main thing to remember is that Indonesia is on the move. They're ambitious, they're smart, and they're ready to make their mark on the world. But they've got some challenges ahead, and their decisions are going to have ripple effects far beyond their borders.
It's a story of potential and progress, but also responsibility. It's about navigating a complex world and making choices that matter.
Exactly. Watching Indonesia's economic journey unfold is going to be fascinating. It's not just important for the region, it's important for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Indonesian economy. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.